G'day guys, my name's Nick and welcome to my channel Low Range Nick, where I do videos about four-wheel driving, accessory fitting and maintenance for your four-wheel drive vehicle. So in today's video I'm going to be fitting an Ironman 50mm lift to the Suzuki Jimny, and I'm going to show you all of the steps necessary to fit the lift kit to the vehicle. So firstly, we'll just jump in a bit closer and have a look at all of the parts that come in the 50mm lift kit. So what you can see is two rear shock absorbers over here. Here are the two front shock absorbers. We've got the 2-inch lifted coils. We've also got castor correction bushes for those front control arms to get the steering and suspension geometry back in check. So we also have some extended bump stops for the front axle, extended brake hose here for the rear axle. We have a cross-member drop kit and also some bushes for those front shocks. And over here we have a little extension bracket here for our headlight adjustment sensor on the rear axle. Now before we get stuck into the fun bit, installing the lifted coils and the longer shocks, there's a couple of preliminary jobs that we need to carry out to the vehicle to allow those axles to fully droop down so we can actually install the lift kit. So the first things that we need to fit to the Suzuki Jimny to enable those axles to droop all the way down are our rear extended brake line. We also need to fit our extended headlight adjustment bracket there to the rear while we're doing the brake line. The other thing we need to do is extend and drop the central cross member to enable the front axle and drive shaft to be able to droop all the way down to fit our lift kit. So what you can see here is all of the parts in our cross member drop bracket kit. So here we have our 4 cross member drop brackets. We have our crush sleeves, nylock nuts, our washers and our bolts. Now the first step to installing the drop bracket kit is to remove the cross member from the vehicle, and then we can carry on with the install. So I'm just going to remove these 14mm bolts and nuts from the cross member and rip it out of the vehicle, and then we can install our drop brackets. So I've just fitted my crossmember drop brackets to the crossmember, and I've left my bolts nice and loose on these brackets, so I've got heaps of movement to play with because I need to slide these little crush sleeves in between the bolt holes when I put it back up into the chassis. So I think I'm ready to jump back under and fit this to the vehicle. So I'm just going to lift it up and try and just align it roughly with the holes, and then I'll start by getting one bolt in on one side just to hold it up there. And then I can work on getting my crush sleeves in after. There we go, that's going to hold that side up. So now I can play around with this side and get my crush sleeve in between the bolt holes and get that bolt through properly. There we go. So now I've tightened down all my crossmember bolts. You can see the clearance here between the front drive shaft and the crossmember is a lot bigger now. So it's given me heaps more room for the axle to articulate down. So that's going to mean that I can actually fit my lifted coils and extended shocks to the vehicle, and the front drive shaft isn't going to hit on this crossmember. So now we can move on to the next step, and that's moving down the rear of the vehicle and fitting the extended brake line and the headlight sensor adjustment bracket. Alright guys, so now we're down the rear of the vehicle at the rear diff, and just above the diff you can see this headlight level sensor up here. So what we need to do is actually extend this bracket, so we need to replace it with this extended bracket, and what that's going to do is correct the headlight level sensor adjustment, and it's going to ensure that our level sensor is reading correctly with our 2-inch lift. So that'll mean that we're not going to blind oncoming traffic with the LED headlights, and it'll be reading correctly. So I'm just having a bit of trouble fitting this extended bracket to the headlight sensor because you can see the hole here. It's actually pretty rough. So whoever's cut it out, must have been a Friday job or something. They've not cut it out very well or cleaned it up very well, because you can see the hole on the original one. It's quite nice and clean, and it's actually slightly bigger than the hole on these ones they've supplied me in the kit. So I'm gonna have to clean this up with a file or drill bit or something and get it to fit. So now we're ready for take two. So I just used a drill bit and my electric drill just to go through a couple of times and clean it up a bit, but I just didn't have a file small enough to fit in the hole, so drill bit was the next best thing. So it seemed to work alright, so we'll see if it fits. Perfect, that's what we want. Alrighty guys, so now I've got my extended bracket on the headlight sensor. Now that's going to be keeping the headlight aim correct even with the 2-inch lift. So now I can move on to the next step, which is extending the brake line. And the brake line we need to extend is the one that goes to the center of the diff. So this actually travels over to the left hand side of the vehicle. So what we need to do is take out the springs that hold the brake line in on either end, and then loosen off the 10mm nuts on the actual brake lines. So we'll do that really quickly and try and get this extended brake line in there without losing too much fluid. That was tight. So you can see there with that top nut on the brake line, if I used a standard spanner on that, that would have definitely stripped. So that was super tight. So lucky I have my pipe spanner on there and it cracked. And what I like to do before I get stuck into it is just loosen off both of these fittings and then just nip them up just gently. So you won't get any fluid leaking out, but what it means is you can use your standard spanner if it's easier to get in there to loosen that off. So that's ready to come out, and I'll do the same to this one too. So now I've just got to remove these little springs that hold the brake lines in. So I'm just going to tap them out with a screwdriver and a hammer and knock them out of there. There we go. Now just get my new one fitted. I'll do the top up first. It's just done up finger tight, and you can see it's stopped dripping already. And now I'll just fit this bottom section and then tighten up the nut. So now I've got this extended brake line fitted. So now I'm just going to bleed up the left-hand rear side of the brakes. So that's the brake line for the left-hand rear. So we'll just bleed up that one line and we'll test the brake pedal and see how it feels. So I should only really need to do that one side, but we'll just see how it goes. Alrighty guys, so now I've got my extended brake line fitted. So I did only have to bleed up this left hand side, and that worked really well. So my brakes are nice and firm now, and I've got that extended brake line fitted. So I'm pretty much done down the rear now, fitting my extended bracket to this headlight sensor and the extended brake line. So what I'm going to do now is actually clean everything down with water. So the best way to get rid of brake fluid is water. So if you do leave brake fluid on things for too long, it can actually eat the paint because it's hygroscopic. So that means it absorbs moisture. So what we want to do is wash this all down really quickly as soon as we finish the job and make sure that we don't have any damage to any of the paint. Alrighty guys, so now that I've got the extended brake line, the extended headlight sensor bracket, and the crossmember drop bracket kit fitted to the Suzuki Jimny, now it's finally time to fit the lifted coils and the extended shocks. So I've just been around the vehicle and taken some measurements. So I'm just measuring from the center of the hub here up to the guard. So I've got all of my measurements here on my piece of paper, so I'll show you those now. So here are the measurements that I've taken from around the vehicle. So you can see I got 460 millimeters on both the fronts and 475 on both the rears. So after the lift kit, I'll re-measure these and see how much lift we've actually gained. Now I'm going to get stuck into ripping the rear suspension out of the Suzuki Jimny. So the first few steps is jacking the vehicle up, removing the wheels and removing the shocks. So let's get stuck into it. Alright guys, so now I've removed both the rear shock absorbers. Now I just need to work on removing the coil springs. So to do that, I'm going to put my jack stands underneath the chassis, and then I'm going to put a jack under the diff and lower down the diff until the coil springs pop out. So then I can replace them with the lifted coil springs. So let's get stuck into getting these coil springs out of the vehicle. So just as I was lowering the diff, I was just keeping an eye on some of these lines and sensors, and this started to get a little bit tight on my headlight level adjustment sensor. So I just popped this little link off just to be safe. So now we can continue in lowering the diff a bit further and just keeping an eye on these sensor lines and the brake hose. There we go. So they're nice and loose now. So now we can remove the coils from the vehicle. So now I can put the 2-inch lifted rear coils into the vehicle. Go. Perfect. So just before I put the new shocks in, you can see that the diameter of the shock is a lot bigger, and also the shock is a bit longer as well. Okay guys, so now I've got the top bolt in these shocks. I actually need to prime these shocks up 4 or 5 times before we actually fit the lower bolt. So what I'm going to do is compress the shock fully and then let it sink all the way back down. And I'm going to do that probably 5 times just to get any air out of the shock absorber. Alright guys, so now I've got my upper and lower shock bolts in, finger tight. So now what I'm going to do is put my wheels back on and then drop the vehicle on the ground. So once the vehicle is on the ground, then I can tighten my upper and lower shock bolts. So now I've jacked the vehicle up, supported it under the diff and removed both my front wheels. So now I'm ready to remove the front shockies from the vehicle. So I've just got a 14mm nut up here and also a 17mm nut and bolt on that lower shock mount. And then we can rip out both these front shockies. So now I've removed the front shockies from the vehicle, I'm almost ready to drop the diff down and remove the front coils. But before I do that, there's a couple of ABS lines here and also vacuum lines here. So before I drop the diff down, I'm just going to preempt that they're going to get pretty tight when I drop the diff right down. So I'm just going to pop this 10mm bolt out here to give me a bit of extra room on this right hand front wheel speed sensor line. And also there's a little clip up here that holds the left hand front wheel speed sensor line in as well. So I'll just pop that out of there. And also I'm going to remove these two vac lines just to give me a little bit of extra length without these getting too tight. So just as I was going down, I noticed these brake lines were getting a little bit tight. So I've just popped the spring clip off them, and then you can just pop them out of the mount there, and that gives you a heap of extra room to play with. So just a bit of silicone spray on these, and then they should pop in. Perfect. And I'll spin it around so it locates in the little notch on the diff. So now I've got the diff jacked up most of the way. I just noticed this bolt here on the front control arms, it's actually right in line with where the shock's going to mount. So what I'm going to have to do is press in my castor correction bushes now before I put the front shockies in. So we can rip these front control arms out now. So I've got 3 bolts in the control arms, we'll remove those, then we can press in the castor correction bushes. So I'm just going to remove one control arm at a time, just so the diff doesn't roll around too much. So I'm going to remove the right control arm, press in the bushes, refit it, and then remove the left control arm from the vehicle. So the castor correction bushes actually twist the diff back around, so this coil will actually be a bit more straight on. And what that does is it gives it a lot better handling, because what we're doing by raising the vehicle is basically pulling the diff back around to an angle that it shouldn't really run at. So with the castor correction bushes, we're going to pull that diff around, straighten those coils up, and give our vehicle better handling on road and off road. So now that I have the front control arms out of the vehicle, what I need to do is use my press tools here and my 12-ton hydraulic press to press the standard bushes out of the arm. Then what I'm going to do is use my diagram here to locate these bushes and press them in the correct position into the control arm. Then I'll be able to refit this to the vehicle, and that will correct the castor using these bushes. So now I've just finished pushing my castor correction bushes into my control arms. Now I'm just going to double check it on the little template here, and also make sure that my bolt holes are 149mm apart to the center of each hole. So that means they'll align perfectly with the mounts on the diff. And my bolt holes are pretty much bang on, so that's awesome. So now we're ready to put the control arms back in the vehicle. Now I just have the 2 bolts on the rear of this control arm holding this up, and I just need to align this front bolt hole with the bush. So you can see it's a fair bit off. So what I need to do is loosen off all my control arm bolts on the other side, and then remove the front bolt from the other side control arm. And then I'm going to lower the diff down and that should allow it to twist and align this bush with the hole. So now I've got all of my bolts in that right hand front control arm, and they're all just nipped up. So you don't want to tighten these down until the vehicle is dropped on the ground and it's at ride height. So what I'm going to do is just leave them how they are. I'm going to jump over the other side, rip the other control arm out and press in the castor correction bushes. So now I've got both my front control arms back in the vehicle. I've just put my spring clips for my brake lines back on. I put my little bolt in this little ABS wheel speed sensor line here in the bracket, and I've also put my 2 vacuum lines on. So now I'm ready to fit the front shocks into the vehicle. So before I put my lower shock bolt in, I just need to prime the front shockies, maybe 3 or 4 times, just to purge the air out of them. Okay guys, so now I have my shocks in the vehicle. What I'm going to do is put my wheels back on, then I'm going to rip the jack stands out and drop it back on the ground. So once it's on the ground, then I can go around and tighten up my control arm bolts and my lower shock bolts. So now that I've tightened all of my control arm bolts and also my shock bolts, I've just gone around with my tape measure and done a bit of a ride height measurement. So just like in the beginning, I did the same measurement from the hub to the guard, and I've come to the conclusion that the lift kit has given 60 millimeters of lift in the front and 50 millimeters of lift in the rear. Now I will expect the lift kit to sort of settle over the next couple of weeks, so I'll do another measurement in a few weeks, and I'm assuming it'll settle to about, 45-50 mil sort of lift, which is perfect. So there you go guys, now I've got the 50 millimeter lift fitted to the Suzuki Jimny. Now all I need to do is take it to my local tyre store and get a wheel alignment. Then they'll be able to get the steering and suspension geometry back in check, and I'll be ready for my next adventure. So thank you very much for watching today's video. If you did enjoy it, please give it a big thumbs up, subscribe to my channel, and stay tuned for more four-wheel driving, accessory fitting, and maintenance videos. Cheers guys.